This weekly podcast inspires you to step outside of your comfort zone. My name is Zakir Muhammad, and I'm your host of the Living Legacy podcast. I am a cancer survivor, brand cultivating strategist, author, and world traveler. This Living Legacy podcast features women of purpose sharing stories of resilience. They are single and married. They are artists and entrepreneurs who run businesses and juggle parenthood. If you are ready to hear interviews about professionalism, entrepreneurship, travel, life, and love, you are in the right place. They will share stories of how they overcame adversity while seeing life through a different lens. Let's get into it. So welcome to another episode of the Living Legacy podcast. If this is your first time tuning in, my name is Akira. I am a brand cultivating strategist, a professional photographer, and a podcaster, as well as an author, as well as a cancer survivor. So this series is a short series that I decided to start in the lieu of current events to not only continue to educate and inspire and empower women, as typically done on the Living Legacy podcast, but also to educate you a bit more. So for those who don't know, I am a born Muslim. In episode 5 of a Living Legacy podcast, I had a conversation with my dad. And so we literally break down everything about the religion of Islam, which is what the Muslim practice. So if you want to learn more about Islam, you can definitely check out the Living Legacy podcast episode 5. If you want to also learn from other Muslim women, because this series features entirely Muslim entrepreneurs, I've actually had the pleasure of featuring a handful of them by now. So the previous guests have been Imani Bashir. She's a world traveler and a journalist. Khadija Abdulaziz, who is an author and an empowerment coach. And then I've also had the pleasure of interviewing my mom. So in episode 36 and 37, we had a 2-part series where not only do we talk about our memoir that we kind of co-wrote together called Seeing Life Through a Different Lens, where we talk about life growing up and me with the cancer survivor, then we also talk about how much Islam kind of played a huge role in our life. And so today I have Sabria Mills. So she became a journalist to come as close to the world as possible. So she is currently a journalist with About Islam, and she's also the co-founder of MACE, which stands for Muslim Advocate with Children of Exceptionalities. So the goal is to empower children and adults with disabilities. She also runs a podcast herself with the Dope Muslim Woman podcast. So it is designed to show the power of owning who you are and standing in your truth, or as I like to say, speaking your truth, even if your voice shakes, and going to your path to greatness. So today we're going to talk about Islam as far as what it was like with her growing up and how being a journalist has shaped her life, and then it's who she is. So Assalamu alaikum, peepee with you, Sabria. Thank you so much for being here. How are you?
Alaikum salam. I'm doing well. How are you? Thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Good. It's a great day. It's a great day for a woman to come together and have a wonderful conversation about the hard stuff. Because we're also going to talk about, because Islam is a beautiful religion, so misunderstood, but also so very discriminant, right? Depending on where we live, depending on who grew up where, right? So we're definitely going to talk about all of that. So why don't you go ahead and tell me the basics of who you are?
Okay. Sorry, plugging in my computer. Apologize. So, subhanAllah, who am I? So my name is Sabria Mills, and as you mentioned, mashallah, it's always interesting because it's like, how do you define it? So at my core heart, I classify myself as a journalist, as a storyteller. This is a recent journey of mine. I always say my purpose and passion is to help give voice to the voiceless. I have a very soft heart and desire to help the marginalized. So with that, I am right now a journalist. I work for actually 2 international publications. I also do some independent journalism as well as I podcast. In addition to that, I do have a nonprofit organization, MACE, as you mentioned, which is also working with marginalized voices as it relates to, children with exceptionalities and really changing the perspective around individuals that have exceptional abilities. And, professionally, I am an educational consultant. So I do work in the field with exceptional children with disabilities, day in and day out, working to empower them, making sure they have the correct services and supports in their educational environments and beyond. So that's a little bit of gist of who I am.
Beautiful, beautiful. So either way, you love people, you love educating, you love learning. So that's the gist of who Sabria is too, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much me summed up. Right.
Perfect, perfect. So how have you learned or utilized your learning experiences and your love for learning with becoming closer to God or Allah?
Yeah, so that's the main point, right? So, it's interesting because I was just reflecting on this, and I always say that whenever, you're on your journey and you're fulfilling your purpose, and the starting place is always tapping into that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't think you can put that it has to start there. So I think, subhanallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's so merciful how he allows us to experience him in our lives. For me, subhanAllah, I started very early. It started for me at the age of 12. At the age of 12 was when I realized through different experiences when I was around my friends and I saw different levels of hurt and pain. And I even experienced some pain as a 12-year-old that I really wanted to know God. And that was from the age of 12 was when I started to make sure I did all my 5 prayers and that, I never, subhanAllah, gave it up at that point. But that was just a mercy from God that he allowed me to experience him at such a young age. But I really, truly believe that we experience our relationship with Allah a lot of time through pain, through adversity. We look at our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, subhanallah, he lost his mother, he lost his father, that pain and that challenge and adversity, and you really get to experience Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as he is supposed to be experienced, as the one, he is sufficient for us. We do not need anything outside of him. Anything else is a bonus. It adds to the essence of our worship. So for me, I just experienced it extremely young and it drives everything that I do. I find it very hard to do things that don't align with what I know Allah has put in me as a purpose. Because everything I do, I pray around. Even before I do a podcast, an episode, I pray around. Anybody I collaborate with, I pray around. It's the driving force for everything. SubhanAllah.
Absolutely. So the power of prayer is something that is similar in every religion, and even for those who are maybe not religious but are spiritual. So they're especially prayer is very important with before you make major decisions, right? Because life is full of every day you make a decision. So how do you utilize the power of prayer specifically with making hard decisions?
Yeah, I think that, that's something that actually has to be cultivated. And I think, you have to, one of the things that I love about this faith is that it's so holistic in a sense of that you really have to be self-aware. You really have to be a self-aware. Really have to take ownership of who you are, your strengths, your weaknesses, before you can even really tap into the essence of prayer in itself. For me, praying is also about stillness, my intuition, what feels what's in alignment here. But before I make major decisions, and then more and more as I kind of work on this journey of doing what it aligns with me and trying to be more purposeful, I'm very conscientious of praying every step of the way. So I try to use the tools that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recommends. So like prayer at night is a big, huge secret and tool that not everybody taps into. But if you can really institute a practice of getting up at night, even if it's for a few minutes, and praying that tahajjud prayer in the middle of the night, you will really see what you're asking for and Allah's guidance exponentially in a very fast way to really drive you. So, it's a real big secret in that nighttime prayer when nobody's watching, nobody else is awake. It's just you and God. Making sure that I have my 5 prayers are always on time. I have a very sensitivity about, the praying on time for me personally, that's also been a driving force. But just really the essence of being still and really listening to where Allah is guiding you is really important. So I do, I have a meditative state. I get really still and I really try to see how do I feel here, after my prayer. And I kind of try to trust that feeling as well.
Absolutely. So I think the importance that maybe most people who do know about Islam or know about Muslims is that you do get in yoga style prayers like 5 times a day. And that's really the best way to also, like you said, be more in tune to yourself and also be more in tune to the direction you're supposed to be going.
That's right, sis. That's what it's about. I shared something. I just want to say this on my page earlier about, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put a gift and a purpose in each and every one of us. And I hear a lot of people saying, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know my gift. And it's like, you have to tap into God first and Allah will reveal it. But believe me, you're supposed to be executing something here on this earth, right? You have a mission, you have a purpose, we all do. And so you have to just get in alignment to really listen and then execute it and be authentic with it.
Absolutely. Now, tell us about the time where you kind of became aligned into becoming a journalist for yourself as a freelance for the website About Islam.
Yeah, that was all God. I swear to goodness. I was feeling, I had my nonprofit organization. I was a leader in my field. I had, leadership positions and all of that. And one of the things that I felt sort of, even with those positions and even with those responsibilities, I still felt like I wasn't utilizing my voice, that I wasn't really being authentic. And I was having struggles. I would have a lot of issues within myself of even how to lead other people. How do you lead other people if you're not really leading yourself in a sense, essentially? So me really making that intentional dua. Like, I didn't see journalism as the solution. What happened is that somebody just approached me out of the blue and was like, hey sis, really it was that random. Like, how do you feel about covering this story for us? And it was a particular story that I was asked to cover for a news publication. And I had done some blogs for my nonprofit organization about exceptional children and things like that. But they were like, how do you feel about covering this story? And I was like, okay. So I covered the story. And then from there, I actually left it alone. And then from there, the news publication approached me and said, hey, like, how do you feel about, becoming an editor? And I was like, hold on, let me first start with so then I started off with freelancing, then I became a news correspondent, reporter. Now I'm a full on journalist. I cover the news desk. I work in, what the current news is. I cover those stories as a news correspondent. I also do some editorial work as well for a couple of different publications. And I realized the power of the pen. I realized the power of amplifying stories that matter. And why my podcast became so essential is because it became a place where you can amplify the voiceless, where you can amplify the stories of, as you do, mashallah, you do it beautifully, the stories of people that perhaps are overlooked, the shakers and the movers and these grassroots people, the people that really matter, stories that drive change, right? So stories that heal. So it became something, this driving mission that unfortunately at this point I can't turn off even if I want to. I cannot stop. It's insane. What's driving me behind me, it's an insane push and drive to keep going forward. So that's sort of it. It was real random, sis. Wasn't intentional.
And that's usually how it goes. As soon as you hone down on your purpose, it's like the rest of it just flows. It really just flows.
Yeah,
and
that's it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he shows how he shows up in our life. When you trust him, he subhanAllah, I've seen it. He really takes care of his servants.
That's the true definition of submitting. Never mind what people think the definition of submitting to a man is, but when you submit to God, that's more than
that's it.
Yeah, more than anything.
That's it. Yeah. Absolutely.
So let's talk about the hard stuff. So you were born into the religion.
Yes, ma'am.
But what happened before that, and then what happened along the way? Let's talk about that story.
The journey, the process. Yes, subhanAllah. Yeah, I was born. My parents converted from other faiths into Islam, and they converted during a critical time. That civil rights era, kind of era of Black Panther movement, Black consciousness. And I always say for both of my parents, what drove them into Islam was that one spiritual base that gave them a sense of self-awareness, self-love, and the ideal of justice. SubhanAllah, you're living in a time where religion was being used to, capture the mindset of the people, right? To keep you enslaved, to keep you feeling inferior. And so Islam really spoke to that essence. And my parents are both real serious, political figures. I get a lot of my fire from them. So they were both involved in those movements, and Islam really spoke to them. So, but, at the same time, you think about it, subhanAllah, like I was, my parents are from Philadelphia. They were very intentional about moving us to the countryside in New Jersey. So I was raised on like acres of land. And so I had a different experience, but I still come from the inner city, urban. I was still educated in urban schools. And so I still have a base there. And, you just deal with a lot of pain and a lot of trauma and a lot of conditioning. And one of the things I'm unraveling now is some of the conditioning that happened with that generation that came into Islam, off the backs of that sort of this extreme, I guess you could say, I hate saying civil rights era, but this extreme racial sort of race wars sort of thing, era of when, Black people were really fed up and tired, and they were, really willing and to do what was necessary, by any means necessary, to push back. But that generation, what happened is that when they were brought into Islam, there wasn't a lot of healing done with a lot of that trauma, right? So as you come into Islam and then you come into raising your kids, and then a lot of what you're getting from Islam is coming from the international, mixed with culture from different, ethnicities and different cultures, and you're trying to institute that on your children. So I think a lot of that was really difficult. Like, what does it mean to be a Muslim girl being raised? I thought it was being quiet, sweet, and agreeable, right? And what I found is that when you're quiet, sweet, and agreeable, a lot of people abuse you and take advantage of you. And abuse you. A lot of young girls and boys have been, I'm going to speak to the girls for a minute, because of this conditioning of what good girls should be, which comes from a cultural context that doesn't have anything to do with Islam. We're abused. We're subject to abuse as children. So, I mean, for me, like navigating that and really identifying like some of these habits of people pleasing, this conditioning that I'm trying to like work against, even to this day, of like, I don't always have to appease. I don't always have to smile and be sweet and nice. You know what I mean? Even if it doesn't speak, if it doesn't speak to what feels right here. So I was married very early. So I was married very early. I was married at the age of 19, and I speak of this a little bit. And that, it was just a time when I was really sheltered. Okay. So I was the kid that, didn't really ride the school bus or didn't go to the parties or nothing. Okay. Nothing. And then you go into a whole marriage with a whole man at 19. So that was one of the big challenges in my life, and just dealing with that and trying to navigate a relationship with a man, not knowing, have an idea of who I am, and then trying to navigate the relationship with a man, and then being okay with walking away from that, and dealing with that heartbreak and dealing with that triumph. There was so much that I had to unravel of conditioning, so much releasing, so much judgment from others, like unshackling myself from, being a divorced woman, being okay with being a single mom, I think a lot of my self-development kind of started there, in my self-discovery really started from that immense heartbreak. Because what happens when you get divorced, it's not just the divorce of the person. You lose and I know we were talking about this on script, right? Yeah. the loss that you experience. And I'm sure it happens no matter what faith you're in, but in the Muslim community, there's a lot of judgment, and there's a lot of like, what did you do? Oh, what did he do? Oh, and then it's like, oh, who am I going to align with? You don't have to align with anybody. You know what I mean? Like, you can literally authentically love. And not just that, as a divorced single woman, you think you have solid relationships and friendships with your girlfriend, and now you become different, and then that relationship changed too. So there's a lot of pain and loss that you have to endure through that process. And, it changes you.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And I think I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I think that's what people don't understand about divorce, is that you are grieving. Even though you're not necessarily a widow, you're still grieving, because there's so much that gets lost in the shuffle, not just financially, but emotionally, but also spiritually, because you do have to reevaluate yourself, especially if you were one of those hoped and prayed that you were going to be the only one, the only married, the only time, so it's
But those ideals are, sis, I'm starting to learn that those ideals, I really try to go back and study our faith and really look at, the foundations of our religion. And even these ideals, I hear people say so much like, yeah, I want to make sure like you marry, it's some type of success if the person that you're married to, that first person that you're married to the rest of your life. Yeah, there's success in that. SubhanAllah. But there's also success in the sister and the brother that has been divorced and that triumphed and tried again and loved again and became a better human being. That existed during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He married divorced women. So these ideals that we have that we push on each other, they're really destructive. They're destructive to our own empowerment and betterment as a people. And
Exactly.
I think that needs to be evaluated too.
And that's what I think, that's the unfortunate side of culture norm mixed in with religious laws, like the religious laws that are there long before culture was there.
You have to be radical and intentional about shifting it. And, it starts with each individual, working against these ideals. The point of the podcast is facilitating these type of dialogues, healing some of these wounds that come from conditioning that has nothing to do with the essence of our faith, how we're supposed to be existing here on this earth. So that's essentially, and what you're doing, may God bless you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevate you, because you're doing the same thing and you're doing the necessary work that needs to be done to help us, unravel some of these destructive things.
This episode is sponsored by Focus Media Group, founded by Zakira. We focus on the social media of entrepreneurs so they don't have to. We understand the frustration of the ever-changing algorithm. Let us help you with your Instagram growth, business strategy, or branding services. Visit focusmediagroup.com to learn more. That's Focus with a PH. PHOCUSED mediagroup.com. Now the work is not done with this conversation, so let's go into, how about was it the word culture shock, right? So from New Jersey to Atlanta?
Well, I mean, I would say culture shock. Definitely there's some differences. I mean, what's interesting is that I moved to different places as a result of a relationship with a man, right? I moved. So I think that's more of the shock of like not really having ownership in the decisions I was making, whether this is a good fit, a good city, a good place for me, the way I want to live. That's something that I think is, it needs to be discovered. But there's a big difference between the North and the South. There's a difference in the mentality. There's a difference in the way people do things. I love living in Atlanta because it is a melting pot of different people from different areas. So I still get to rock with my northern folks. But one thing about when you're raised in the North, there's a level of rawness, especially if you're in the urban cities. There's a level of rawness that for some people will say mean or harsh or tough or whatever. But there's a level of rawness that's just authentic. Like, what you see is what you get. Down here, there's a lot more.
It's fake. You can call it fake.
I was gonna say, but also passive aggressive. Like, where you see a lot of people that, it's a lot. A lot of jabs. That took me a while to get used to, like all these passive aggressive jabs. I'm like, why don't you just come out and say what you mean, and we can handle it like that, because up north we kind of say what we mean and mean what we say. But I think that's the biggest difference. But alhamdulillah, I'm happy here in Atlanta overall.
That's
great
good.
Here.
Now let's talk about wherever you want to start first. Any experiences you've had in work, in love, in religion, with any colorism, sexism, or discrimination of any kind?
Being an African-American girl, I was raised very intentional. Like my father, mashallah, was very conscientious of how he raised me. So when I was young, before I could really read, he sat me down with the autobiography of Malcolm X, and he sat me down with The Art of War.
How old were you when you read it?
Maybe 5, 6. I was reading, but not on those the higher levels, right? So he broke down, New World, like really political, like really to understand. One of the things he was really intentional about with me was really understanding the power of my Black skin, my femininity, and me being visibly a visible Muslim woman. He used to always say, you have to be really prepared for what you're going to endure in this world. And I never really got it because we lived in a country house. And I think when we had like one other neighbor on the street and we could go outside and have acres of land. And, we just lived like, this really peaceful life. But he would always be really intentional about preparing me. So I realized that, when I got to a certain point, I got married early on, and it was like post 9/11. And it was my first really wake up call when they began to target, the federal government began to target a community that I lived in. There's a documentary out there called New Muslim Cool. If you watch it, it gives a little bit of a story of it. But I was in that community, and I saw how, not just because of your faith, that's one layer, right? But because of your Black skin and because of your consciousness. See, the thing is that, you can be African American. People on a surface level they don't care anything about you until you have a level of consciousness. Because once you have a level of consciousness, you have to live in your divine excellence. Black people living in their divine excellence is scary as crap for those that want to oppress them, right? So it's like for a Black community, Black Muslims, for Black people, to be in a level of consciousness about who they are. And then you add Islam on that, with the elements of Islam that come with a sense of justice, and even the political component that comes in Islam. There's like a political structure that comes with the religion of Islam. It's extremely threatening. So I think when I saw that level of targeting on many, many levels, as a young woman that was sheltered, I really began to be aware. So I started to not take things for like face value, the surface level of maybe discrimination I experienced on the job, or, because I wear the hijab, or because I'm Black, or, you deal with those issues on a surface level. But I really began to look at it as, institutionalized racism, the structural barriers that are here, the disparities that exist, that is very intentional in education and healthcare and housing and all these things that are set in place to keep an elite group elite. Right? To keep an elite group elite. They benefit from our oppression. They benefit from our own destruction, right? Our self-destruction. So they benefit from that. So I think being conscientious of that, I really had a very extreme experience with it by being actually targeted by the federal government. Post 9/11. So, and when I say targeted, I mean like surveillance and followed and, all of that. So, yeah.
But what's crazy is that, at least from my experience, my understanding of the experience is that's when most people have, that was truly a lot of test for a lot of the Muslims, really, of how much do you love me, because a lot of people really had to be tested, and of how much are you willing to educate, how much are you willing to put on the line, because there was a whole different misunderstanding. And even for me, I think growing up, I've always just had multiple identities. One, yes, as a African American woman, Black woman, and then thirdly, but also being a woman of with exceptionalities, right? So being a cancer survivor, and first of all, it's like already different just throwing in the fact that I have exceptionalities, because they first look at you as a woman, for second look at you as you're Black, and then it's like, okay, so now you need help from us, like for what? Right. So it was different. It was definitely at least my life too was also like a definition of overcoming adversity, because there's so many, they weren't necessarily barrier, because my mom is a tough one, right? So she knew how to, she's from New York, right? So she knew how to navigate these systems and do her research, read these books, go to the library. She worked at the library a majority of my life. So it's definitely, that's what I think people just really need to do, is just really read, watch videos. Now it's a new era of watch videos, listen to podcasts, read a book. But what other tips would you have for those who want to learn and educate themselves and do something?
In addition to what you said, which is true, you definitely have to be a researcher. What I believe personally is, I look at, how did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala organize this Quran? We always want to go back to, because if you really are a person of faith, you don't want to reinvent anything. You want to look at what is the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructed us. How did he deliver the message to us? How is this Quran, which we use as a tool, which is our learning tool, how is it organized? And when I look at the Quran, when I think of the lessons that we're supposed to ponder about and reflect on for our life, they're historical principles. So in the Quran, you have the story of Abraham and Lut and Jesus alayhi salam, and so they're all there, right? They're historical stories. And so I think there's something to be said about really being a people, especially now, subhanAllah, we have to really study history, and we have to authentically study history, and we have to look back at a lot of these historical principles, our messengers that are there in our book, and because a lot of that is showing up in this day and age. And how did they navigate it? What were the instructions there? What were the tools provided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and delivered with our messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and our other nabis, our other prophets? How did they deal with oppression, right? That was there. How did they deal with, these sort of injustices, right? It's there. So I think really studying history, and we need to support our historians. Like, we really need to support our history. They're dying off. Do you know a list of them? There used to be, no, we don't. They're dying off. We need to support our historians, because that, to me, is a critical piece that when I look at the Quran and I study the Quran, I see that our lessons of how we're supposed to show up in this world today, how we're supposed to execute and live our life and navigate all these trials and tribulations, is by pulling from history. So I think that that's a critical point. And then you also have to align yourself. One of the things I've realized as I grow is that the importance of aligning yourself with individuals that are conscious, that are educated, that are truth tellers, right? That are people that are good, conscious people that want good for you, want good for other people. Like, you have got to align yourself, and you have to be radical almost about subhanAllah, we may want to change the world, but as you're growing and as you're trying to develop and educate yourself, you have to be radical about kind of separating yourself from those that are on another tip, because that's the quickest way to pull yourself back into mindsets and thinking patterns that are unhealthy, and that are not in alignment with how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to live. How Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants Zakira to execute and show up and live in his life is not the same how he wants Sabria to execute and show up in his life. But Sabria and Zakira can rock together, because we still like-minded, and I can help you execute your greatness as you can help me execute my greatness. That's what I mean. But the other stuff, I've been in that place for so long. It's kept me so shackled of being, in spaces and places where I feel so unfulfilled, where I feel so silenced, where I feel so apologetic for just being me, just showing up, being authentic. I have to apologize for it, and it keeps you shackled, and it keeps you in the mind. If you think so low of yourself, or if you're constantly in an apologetic state, how on earth are you going to talk about you're going to be fighting some type of oppression? You need to stop oppressing yourself. So it really starts there. And I really think, mashallah, like I said, I have to keep giving praise and gratitude to you, sister, because people like you, mashallah, because you reached out to me, and not only that,
I don't remember how we connected now, thanks to Facebook.
And you also reached out to me to help me, sis, on a straight empowerment tip. Do you understand the power in that? Do you understand the power? Like, you have a gift, right? You have a skill. You can keep that to yourself. Like, you are equal podcaster in this game, right? Like, you have a gift in an area that would benefit you as a competitive podcaster, quote unquote. But no, you say, hey, Sabria, listen, I got this skill. How about let me help you? Come on, sis. That's something serious. That's something serious. So may Allah elevate you.
Thank you for that. Because not everybody, that would definitely one of the, I agree with you, having to get out of that mentality of nobody going to treat me the way that I treat people, but it doesn't mean that I shouldn't, do that. So, that too is something that I learned, as of recently, as I'm stepping into my true authentic self of this is who I am, whether you like it or not. Some people will walk all over you, but you have boundaries for that now. So
absolutely. Yeah. There you go, girl. You better go ahead with yourself.
Thank you. So yeah, this is great. History piece of stuff. Alignment is so important. Knowledge is power. I feel like those are the three gems that people can take away from this conversation? What else would you add for those who
And I wanted to speak on it may veer a little bit for what you're asking, but I think it's just so important. I don't want to lose it. When you mentioned about the different challenges you experience, especially with an exceptionality. And I think that this is an important piece why I created MACE, Muslim Advocates for Children with Exceptionalities, because what I see is that, again, studying our book, our sunnah of what I learned is that individuals that were deemed different or had particular challenges, whatever. I say exceptionalities because because to me, it's I see them as gifts, right? I see them as gifts. How did the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam treat these individuals? And what did we learn in the book? So you have the situation, I have to say this, of the blind man. Everybody knows the story, and how, there was a time where Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he really, he wanted to access, not that he was dismissive to the blind man, but he wanted to access a king and a leader. He was thinking a little bit like, how can he broaden his message? And what happened? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down an ayat, a revelation about the blind man, and focusing in on that. And then what did Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam do? He didn't just say, this is why, he didn't just say, okay, I'll include you in, come on. He elevated, he empowered, he gave space. He gave space for this brother to be in leadership in the Senate, and not on some equal opportunity, type tip, because that man had a gift in himself, right? His sense of sight might have been impaired, but his sense of hearing, his intellectual capacity, his ability to feel and be empathetic and to understand, was heightened. And that's when I work with children, that's when I began to realize, that's what really made me identify something that was really critical. Like, subhanAllah, like, for example, the dyslexic child that has struggles with reading, that was challenged with being able to, put words together to make sounds. I work with these children. I'm like, subhanAllah, but you're 8 and you can have a higher intellectual conversation with me. And then I can say something to you, say, oh, Miss Mills, but why X, Y, and Z? Like, you can reach beyond, like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala overcompensated you. Like, he gave you perhaps a barrier or challenge in one area, but then he gifted you in another. That's what I'm saying. When you say exceptionality, that's why I use that, and I'm intentional. And I'm like, subhanAllah, it's such something that we need to be conscientious of, how we see people, right? Stop talking about this idea of, what do you want to say? Oh, let's, inclusion.
Oh, poor guy, or poor girl.
Yeah, the pity, but not even just that, is not like to say, even just stopping at inclusion. Let's just include them in, give them little programs here and there. No, like, these individuals have gifts. They actually should be leaders, because a lot of them, especially an autistic child, subhanAllah, have you ever been around a person with autism? It's fascinating. It's like the fact that you're not utilizing these individuals in your society, it is holding back your society. The Muslim community can be a lot further and beyond if they actually utilize individuals with these sort of exceptional abilities and in their leadership roles. They should be the great thinkers of this time. So, sister, don't get me started, because I'm real passionate about
I know. I see you being fired up, and I'm with you on that. I'm with you on that's a conversation. Mm-hmm.
We don't talk about it, and we think, exactly. How I was treated in this field by, like, community leaders and stuff, not all, but was like, oh, sis, that's so sweet. Okay, alhamdulillah, go ahead, do your little program. Alhamdulillah. We don't really have that issue in our community, but it's cute. And it's like, do you understand that if you really want to be revolutionary, if you really want to fight against oppression, if you really want to be a community that represents the community of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you're missing a critical piece. You're missing something that's really essential, because you do not have representation of individuals that are diverse and different in their thinking capacity and their skill levels, and their sense of their senses or whatever. Like, you don't have representation. They're not in the masajids. They're not in your leadership positions. We're missing a critical piece, which is going to be able to drive, which is holding back our communities, in my opinion. So sorry, I had to speak on that.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
No, I agree. And I'm glad we came together on this, because that's my take on what's going on in the world. Yes, thank goodness for searching for more people of color into the leadership positions. But, like, my mom and I both have struggled. And that's the gist of what, our book is about, of what it was like having all these disabilities and having to go through all these barriers and navigate all these things, because, like you said, we are gifted in more ways than people can even fathom. And so it's just literally a matter of what are you going to do about it?
Exactly. How are you going to assist and utilize this? And it's about, a lot of individuals, because you're, as children, you're conditioned that you're different, you're conditioned that you're inferior. So a lot of times they become voiceless. But, it's also for people like you, SubhanAllah, speaking on it and empowering yourselves. I also feel the reason why I kind of navigated a bit out of that space, I still do the work, is because I also felt like, SubhanAllah, like it's almost like let's look at racism, right? You got a white, and a Caucasian individual coming in, offering the solution for the oppressed Black people, the people without voices, right? Even now, I hear a lot of like non-Black individuals like, I'll give you the space, I'll give you the resources, and I'll amplify you. And it's like, I can amplify myself. Like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me the skill set. And I also felt funny about that, in that space of not, I know the children that I work with, they have a voice. They can actually empower themselves. You know what I mean? It's just about allowing space for it, but they don't need me. They don't need me to tell, let me come save you. I didn't like that potentially I was doing that as well, and speaking on behalf of a group of people that can speak for themselves. Right. So, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Girl, you gonna have me getting all deep with that topic.
That's good. So we definitely want to be able to continue this conversation. Definitely follow the Living Legacy Podcast on Facebook and follow the Living Legacy Podcast on Instagram. We are also at Living Legacy Community, as a Facebook group. So if you want to continue the conversation, definitely leave a comment. Let us know what you think, what your favorite part was, anything that you want to share. We would definitely take a look. Now, where can we find you and follow you, Sabria, everywhere on social media?
I'm trying to calm that down. So I would just say the Dope Muslim Woman Podcast. The Dope Muslim Woman Podcast is on Facebook at the Dope Muslim Woman Podcast, on Instagram, the Dope Muslim Woman Podcast. We're on Anchor, Spotify, Apple. So we have audio podcasts. We also do live podcasts on our Facebook Live, just like you. So go ahead and follow there. I also have a page. It's private. I don't typically, let everybody on my personal page. I'm still working on that. But about Islam, you can see a lot of my articles if you're interested in that as well. So MACE, our website, wearemace.com is also where we are if you're interested in the piece on empowering children with disabilities.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for this empowering conversation.
Thank you. Like I said, may Allah elevate you. Says I actually taking from your example, believe it or not. Honestly, I am taking from your example. So you don't know what you do that impacts the life of other people and provides an example for how other people should show up and live. So thank you for providing an example of how I should exist in this podcasting world.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Living Legacy Podcast. Be sure to subscribe, follow, and download so you don't miss the next episode. If you want to learn more, you can visit ZakiraNayar.com. That's ZakirNayar.com. Do you have any suggestions on a topic you want to be talked about? Send me an email or leave them in a review. If you love this episode, be sure to share it with your friends.